The last day of the mammoths. There was a time before silence, before the plains lay empty and the wind moved through grass that nothing grazed, before the rivers ran cold and uncrossed, before the valleys held only the echo of a world that no longer knew what had lived there. There was a time when the earth shook beneath feet that were not human. Close your eyes and go back. Not 1,000 years, not 10,000. Go back to the edge of the last great cold, to a world that breathed differently than this one, that smelled of tundra and animal musk and the deep, clean scent of ice that had never melted. Go back to a morning that looked, from a distance, like any other morning, except that it was not. The Pleistocene epoch was not a world of monsters. That word belongs to the imagination of people who have never stood in the presence of something genuinely ancient. What the Pleistocene was, what it truly was, in its bone and breath and vast ungovernable scale, was a world of abundance so total it is almost impossible to picture from where we stand now. Mammoths moved across the northern continents in herds that stretched from one horizon to the other, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands upon thousands, massive, slow, unhurried, carrying their weight through landscapes of ice-age grass and dwarf willow with the patience of creatures that had no reason to believe they would not always exist. Their tusks curved outward and upward like the arms of something reaching for the sky, ivory grown over decades, scarred by the work of digging through winter snow to find a frozen vegetation beneath. Their coats were dense and layered, red, brown, and amber in the slanted light of subarctic afternoons, rippling in the wind like the surface of a slow river. They communicated in sounds below the range of human hearing, deep, resonant vibrations that traveled to the ground itself, to the permafrost, to the bones of the earth, from one herd to another across distances of miles. The ground spoke, and they listened, and they answered. They had done this for hundreds of thousands of years. They were, in every meaningful sense, one of the most successful large animals this planet had ever produced, and they were already dying. There was a time before silence, before the plains lay empty and the wind moved through grass that nothing grazed, before the rivers ran cold and uncrossed, before the valleys held only the echo of a world that no longer knew what had lived there. There was a time when the earth shook beneath feet that were not human. Close your eyes and go back. Not 1,000 years, not 10,000. Go back to the edge of the last great cold, to a world that breathed differently than this one, that smelled of tundra and animal musk and the deep, clean scent of ice that had never melted. Go back to a morning that looked, from a distance, like any other morning, except that it was not. The Pleistocene epoch was not a world of monsters. That word belongs to the imagination of people who have never stood in the presence of something genuinely ancient. What the Pleistocene was, what it truly was, in its bone and breath and vast ungovernable scale, was a world of abundance so total it is almost impossible to picture from where we stand now. Mammoths moved across the northern continents in herds that stretched from one horizon to the other, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands upon thousands, massive, slow, unhurried, carrying their weight through landscapes of ice-age grass and dwarf willow with the patience of creatures that had no reason to believe they would not always exist. Their tusks curved outward and upward like the arms of something reaching for the sky, ivory grown over decades, scarred by the work of digging through winter snow to find a frozen vegetation beneath. Their coats were dense and layered, red, brown, and amber in the slanted light of subarctic afternoons, rippling in the wind like the surface of a slow river. They communicated in sounds below the range of human hearing, deep, resonant vibrations that traveled to the ground itself, to the permafrost, to the bones of the earth, from one herd to another across distances of miles. The ground spoke, and they listened, and they answered. They had done this for hundreds of thousands of years. They were, in every meaningful sense, one of the most successful large animals this planet had ever produced, and they were already dying. The dying had begun long before anyone recognized it as dying. Climate was the first executioner. Slow, impersonal, merciless in a way only geological forces can be merciless. The great ice sheets were retreating. The world was warming, not as we use that word now, not in a span of decades, but over millennia, in pulses and reversals, the climate lurching forward like something unsure of its own direction. The grasslands that had sustained the mammoth herds were changing. The vast steppe The mammoth steppe, scientists will eventually call it, that cold, dry, extraordinarily productive ecosystem that had stretched from Spain to Canada across the top of the world, was fragmenting. Forests were advancing where there had been open plains. Wet tundra was replacing dry grassland. The plants that mammoths needed, the grasses and sedges with their dense protein content, were retreating northward, and the mammoths followed, as they had always followed, as their ancestors had always followed. But northward had a limit, and so there was climate. There was habitat loss. There was a slow geographical constriction of a world that had been wide and was becoming narrow. And then there was something else. Something that crossed from Asia into the Americas over a land bridge that the receding seas had not yet swallowed. Something that carried fire in its hands and memory in its mind. Something that learned very quickly, with a speed that no predator before it had ever demonstrated, that the mammoth, for all its size, for all its tusks and mass and thunderous presence, could be killed. We had arrived. The relationship between early humans and mammoths is not a simple story of slaughter. Nothing in the deep past is simple. We know, from cave paintings in France and Spain, from carved ivory figurines, from the ritualized arrangements of mammoth bones in settlements across Eastern Europe, that early humans did not merely hunt the mammoth. They revered it. They painted it in ochre and charcoal on cave walls by firelight. Those curved tusks unmistakable, that sloping forehead, that hump of fat and muscle at the shoulder. They carved its image in its own bone. They built their shelters from its skeleton, great curved rib bones arranged like cathedral arches, mammoth skulls forming the foundations of homes in the Ukrainian steppe, the dead animal becoming the architecture of the living world. This reverence did not protect the mammoth. Perhaps nothing could have. But it tells us something about who we were in that meeting. Not purely destroyers, not purely predators, but something more ambivalent and more tragic than either. Something that could look at the thing it was killing and find it beautiful. Something that could mourn what its own hands were undoing. The human hunters of the Pleistocene were extraordinary. They had language, cooperation, the ability to plan across time, to coordinate a hunt that involved driving an animal toward a cliff or a bog, to learn the seasonal movements of the herds, to pass that knowledge from generation to generation in story and song, and the accumulated wisdom of people who had watched mammoths their entire lives. They did not need to kill many. The mathematics of megafauna extinction is brutal in its simplicity. A mammoth cow produces one calf every 4 to 5 years. The calves are vulnerable for years before they grow to full size. The herds are slow to recover from losses. Human hunters, operating in coordinated groups, could remove animals from a population faster than that population could replace them. Not dramatically, not in a single great slaughter, but persistently, year after year, generation after generation, following the herds northward as the climate pushed them, taking the easiest animals, the young, the old, the isolated. The arithmetic of extinction does not require a massacre. It requires only a small, consistent imbalance between birth and death. Year by year, season by season, the herds grew thinner. Picture a late autumn afternoon, somewhere what will eventually be called Siberia, in a time so distant from this moment that the very geography of the continent is different. The coastlines farther out, the rivers running in courses that no longer exist, the permafrost deep and permanent beneath a thin skin of grass and sedge. A herd moves through the amber afternoon light. There are 30 of them, fewer than there once would have been in this place, in this season, but still a herd, still a family unit held together by the oldest females, the matriarchs who carry in their minds a memory of water sources and migration routes and places of safety going back 40 years, 50 years, the living archive of everything a mammoth needs to know to survive. The calves stay close to their mothers. The adolescents move at the edges. The old bull walks alone behind the herd, as old bulls do, his tusks so long and curved that he has learned to carry his head in a particular way to balance their weight. The light is failing. The temperature is dropping with a speed that means a hard night, the kind of cold that settles over the tundra like something alive, that finds the gaps in fur and flesh and drives into the bone. They are looking for a place to shelter, for a depression in the land, a stand of dwarf trees, anything that will break the wind that is already beginning to move across the plain from the north, carrying ice crystals and the particular silence of a world preparing for dark. They do not see the fire. They smell smoke, faint, distant, nothing that their ancestors' memory has taught them to fear. Because fire on a tundra is not unusual, because lightning strikes the dry summer grass and burns in lines that the herds have always walked around, because fire is part of this world and not inherently dangerous unless it is close. But this fire is not lightning. This fire is carried. The hunters have been waiting since before dawn. They know this herd. They have followed it for 3 days, tracking to the marks left in frost-hardened mud, reading the signs with the fluency of people for whom tracking is language, the depth of footprint, the distance between steps, the way the grass is bent, the presence of dung that is still faintly warm. There are 12 of them. They carry spears tipped with carefully worked stone, flint and obsidian napped to edges sharper than anything that grows naturally in this landscape. They carry knowledge. They carry patience. They have done this before, and their fathers did it before them. And the story of how to do it is sewn into the fabric of who they are as deeply as anything they know. They have chosen the place carefully. A low ridge ahead of the herds, likely path. A shallow ravine to the east where the going is treacherous, ice-covered, broken ground, the kind of terrain where a large animal can lose its footing. They will use fire to push the herd eastward toward the ravine, and in the confusion and the dark and the cold, they will take one animal, perhaps 2 if the fortune of the hunt allows it. One mammoth will feed their band for weeks. Its hide will be shelter. Its bones will be tools. Its fat will be fuel. Its ivory will be traded across distances. So vast a people at either end will never meet. They are not wasteful. They cannot afford to be wasteful. Every part of what they take will be used, honored, consumed in the long darkness of a Pleistocene winter. This does not make what they are doing less consequential. The fire catches. The herd moves. Not in panic yet. Mammoths do not panic easily. They are too large, too accustomed to their own invulnerability, but they move away from the smoke and the orange flickering that is now visible in the dimming light, moving in the direction the eldest female chooses, moving with a low rumbling communication that passes between them like a current, like a thought shared by 30 minds at once. Eastward, toward the ravine they do not know is there. The old matriarch stops. Something in her, some depth of memory or instinct, hesitates. She raises her trunk and reads the air. There is smoke. There is the cold, chemical smell of humans. There is a ravine ahead, its broken edges visible now in the last light, if she would look. She looks, and for a moment, one long, suspended, impossible moment, she is still. The herd waits behind her. The hunters hold their breath. The wind moves through the grass and carries nothing but cold. Then one of the adolescents, young, frightened, its instincts overwhelmed by the fire behind it, breaks to the side and the movement cascades to the herd the way panic always cascades, the way fear has always been contagious. And they are moving again, all of them. And the matriarch moves with them because she is their anchor, and they are her world, and she will not leave them. And the ravine opens beneath the leading animals. The sound that follows is not like anything that belongs in a quiet landscape. It is mass and momentum, and the terrible physics of large bodies in motion, encountering the sudden absence of solid ground. It is the sound of a world breaking along a fault line that had always been there, waiting. The hunters move from their positions. They are fast and precise in what they do. They do with the clean efficiency of people who understand that suffering prolonged is suffering added to, that the taking of life carries with a responsibility to do it with a minimum of unnecessary pain. But the sound does not stop quickly, and in the darkness afterward, when the fire has died and the cold has deepened and the work of the hunters is done, there is a silence over the ravine that is different from ordinary silence. It is a silence of something that will not come back. Somewhere in the herd, a calf is calling. It has been calling since the chaos began, a sound that carries in a way that only the sounds of young animals carry, a frequency that triggers something ancient and involuntary in almost every creature that hears it, a frequency that means, I am lost, I am here. Where are you? The hunters hear it. They do not look at each other when they do. There is no ceremony to this moment, no ritual that covers what it is. There is only the dark and the cold and the sound of something calling for a mother that will not answer. It calls through the night. By morning it is silent. This scene, or something like it, played out across the northern continents for thousands of years. Not once, not in a single catastrophic moment, But in 1,000 variations, in 1,000 different landscapes, under 1,000 different skies, as the climate shifted and the grasslands contracted and the human hunters followed the herds wherever they retreated, the woolly mammoth did not go extinct overnight. It went extinct the way most things go extinct, in a long, slow diminishment that looked, from inside it, like ordinary life continuing. The herds grew smaller. The range shrank. The years in which young mammoths were born grew fewer, and the years in which they died grew more, and the balance that had held for hundreds of thousands of years finally, irreversibly, tipped. By 10,000 years ago, the mammoths were gone from the mainland continents, gone from the vast steppe that had been their kingdom, gone from the river valleys and the sheltered plains and the routes their ancestors had walked for millennia, gone from the cave paintings still, but no longer from the living world. Present in art, absent from the ground beneath the artist's feet. A small population survived on Wrangel Island, a remote Arctic refuge off the coast of Siberia, for another 6,000 years. Isolated, dwarfed by their island constraints, the last mammoths alive on Earth walked a shrinking coastline, while the pyramids of Egypt were already ancient, while Babylon was already rising and falling, while human civilization was already building the world that would one day discover their bones in the permafrost and grieve for them. The last mammoth died on Wrangel Island approximately 4,000 years ago. We do not know the day. We do not know the hour. We do not know if it was cold or the Arctic summer had laid a brief and fragile warmth across the tundra grass. We do not know if it died alone or if there were others, a handful, a remnant, a memory of a herd standing in the low amber light of the last afternoon. We know only that at some moment, in some place, a mammoth breathed its last, and the species was over, and the world that had held them, that had been shaped by them, grazed by them, walked by them for hundreds of thousands of years, continued without them, not knowing what it had lost, not knowing what an absence that size would mean for the grasslands and the rivers and the carbon stored in the permafrost beneath. The world continued. It always does. But something essential had left it. We found them in the ice. The permafrost of Siberia and Alaska and the Yukon has been surrendering them for centuries, emerging from the melting ground with a completeness that seems impossible, seems almost cruel in its specificity. Not bones, bodies, fur still intact, skin still present. In some cases, stomach contents preserved, the last meal of an animal that died 15,000 years ago, still identifiable. Grasses, flowers, the last things it tasted on the last day it walked the earth. A baby mammoth, frozen in Siberian permafrost, was found in 2007. She was named Luba. She was approximately 1 month old when she died, roughly 42,000 years ago. Her eyelashes were intact. The expression on her face was, there is no other word for it, peaceful. 1 month old, 42,000 years. The scientists who examined her wept. Not all of them, but some. And the ones who did not weep were quiet in a way that is its own kind of mourning. Because Luba is not a specimen. She is not a data point. She is a calf who was 1 month old and had a mother and a herd and a world. And that world is gone, and she is all that is left of it, preserved by the cold that killed her, returned to us by the warming that threatens to undo the world that replaced hers. There is something about that, about the ice giving back what it took. That feels less like science and more like confession. We talk now, with increasing seriousness, with genuine scientific intent, about bringing the mammoth back. The genome has been mapped. The technology of gene editing has advanced to the point where the specific genetic sequences that gave mammoths their cold-resistant hemoglobin, their dense fat layer, their shaggy insulating coats, can potentially be introduced into the genome of the Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative, separated from it by less than 4 million years of evolution, which in genetic terms is intimate. Companies exist. Funding exists. The ambition is real, and the science, while not simple, is not impossible. The extinction. The word sounds like a reversal of time, like a correction. But a woolly mammoth grown in a laboratory from edited elephant cells and gestated in an artificial womb is not the mammoth that walked the Pleistocene steppe. It is something new, something we have made, shaped by our intentions rather than by the long pressure of evolutionary time. It is a proxy, a reconstruction, a monument to the thing we lost, wherein the thing's face. This is not necessarily wrong, but It is not the same as undoing what was done. What was done cannot be undone. This is perhaps the hardest truth in all of natural history. Harder than extinction itself. Harder than the mathematics of population collapse. Harder than the image of a 1-month-old calf preserved in ice for 42 millennia. What was done cannot be undone. And we are the species that did it. Not maliciously, not with understanding, not with any awareness of what was being lost. The hunters who followed the mammoth herds northward were not destroyers. They were survivors, doing what every organism in the history of this planet has done, which is to use the resources available to persist through another season, another winter, another generation. They were brilliant and adaptive and human in the fullest sense, full of reverence for things they killed, full of stories about why the world was the way it was, full of the kind of knowledge that comes from living in close and constant contact with the world rather than at a remove from it. They did not know they were the last generation to see mammoths in certain places. They could not have known. The extinction was too slow, too gradual, too distributed across too many landscapes, and too many years to be legible from inside it. This is a part of the story that should unsettle us most. Not the extinction itself, but the invisibility of it to the people living through it. Because we are also living through something. We are also the inheritors of a story in progress. A story whose ending we cannot yet read, whose scope we cannot fully see, whose most important chapter may not be the one we are currently in, but the one that follows it by a generation, or 2 or 10. We are not the cave painters who hunted the mammoth. We have more information than they had, more perspective, more understanding of ecological systems and geological time, and the mathematics of population biology. We have no excuse for the same blindness. And yet, in a museum in Amsterdam, a mammoth skeleton stands in a gallery of pale light and careful silence. Visitors pass. Children stop and stare upward at the curve of the tusks, the impossible scale of the rib cage, the long bones of the legs that once carried something living across a landscape of ice and grass and northern wind. Sometimes a child reaches out a hand toward the bone before the parent gently redirects them. The impulse to touch is not disrespectful. It is the opposite. It is the oldest human response to death. This need to close the distance, to make contact, to insist that the separation is not final. The mammoth does not feel the reaching hand. But perhaps the reaching matters anyway. Perhaps the act of reaching across 40,000 years, across extinction and ice and the accumulated layers of a world built on the absence of this one. Perhaps that reaching is itself a kind of answer to the question the extinction poses. The question is not only, what did we lose? The question is, what are we? Are we the species that fills every landscape and consumes every resource and does not notice what disappears in the wake of our passing? Or are we the species that builds museums to hold what is lost, that sequences the genomes of the extinct and weeps over frozen faces of ancient calves, that writes the names of the disappeared into its stories and its art and its grief? Are we the hunters with the fire? Or are we the ones standing in the gallery, reaching? We are both. We have always been both. And the mammoth, that vast, patient, vanished creature, that thunder on the ancient plain. The mammoth holds both true simultaneously in its long, silent bones, waiting for us to be honest enough to claim them. Somewhere in the permafrost, there are more of them, still locked in the ice, still waiting. As the ground warms, as the ice that held them for millennia begins, slowly, to release, they will emerge. More lubbas, more adults, more calves, more last meals and last moments return to the surface of a world that has changed completely since they left it. The ice is a library, and it is melting. And what it gives back as it melts is both a gift and a reckoning. A gift of knowledge, of connection, of the ability to look into the face of a lost world, and a reckoning, because the warming that releases them is itself a consequence of us. And the lesson they carry in their preserved and perfect bodies is a lesson we've been given before. The world can hold a thing for a very long time, and then it cannot. There was a time before silence. We know that now, because the silence tells us. Because the empty plains and the absent herds and the permafrost giving up its dead all speak of a fullness that once was and is no longer. We came into that fullness, and we changed it. We did not know, in the beginning, what we were changing. We do not have that excuse anymore. The mammoth is gone. What comes after us will depend entirely on whether we are willing to stand in the amber light of what we know. to look at the curve of the tusk and the frozen face of the calf and the empty grasslands that were once the mammoth steppe, and understand that the world is not made for us. We are made of it. All of us. Everything that has ever breathed. They walked this earth for hundreds of thousands of years. They left no monuments. They built no cities. They painted no caves. We painted them. Remember what that means.